So in this video, I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about this rollerball pen. It's called the Reynolds Trimax. It says refillable fluid ink system. It is a liquid ink rollerball, which is a fairly popular style. And it's one we've talked about many times on this channel. I've never used one from Reynolds, and I guess I've used very few liquid ink rollerballs from India or marketed towards the Indian market. Usually the pens I've used from India have been ballpoint, so I was excited to try this one out. It's not a pen that's very easy to find in the US or Europe from what I understand, but you can track them down on Amazon and then eBay. You'll usually end up buying, 10 or 12 of them, and it'll be $10 or $12 with, a few dollars shipping and a lot of waiting, but pretty reasonable pricing overall. Maybe not relative to what you pay for it in India, but, the absolute price of it isn't too bad. The interesting thing is you'll get, instead of a 12-pack that you would typically find, you'll get 10 or 12 individually wrapped ones like this. It's a little bit wasteful, but it seems like it's the only way to get at the pen. On the marketing side, it says Trimax. Again, that's the name of the pen. Reynolds is the manufacturer. Max right length, max precision, max smoothness. Rollerballs, typically you would have maximum smoothness. This is a needle tip, so I think they have max precision. Maximum right length is maybe a comment on how much ink is in there, but it'd be very surprising if a liquid ink rollerball had a very long, like a lot of longevity as far as the right length, just because the ink is so watery that you go through it pretty quickly, even at a 0.5 millimeter. Other details: fluid ink system, special ink for fast writing, waterproof ink, blue, black, red, and green, so fairly common colors. This is the blue color. You see it was an individually sold one unit and 50 rupees. So you'd pay, again, a lot less locally. Just on the manufacturing side, you can see marketed and branded by Reynolds pens. Reynolds is, a very old pen company, not very old relative to like pens in general, but the company comes from the 40s. I think it says, since 1945. That's Reynolds as one of the first pens to make a ballpoint pen in the US. Since then, the Reynolds brand has expanded and it's been acquired at some point by Newell, which is the same brand that owns like Sharpie and Parker and Rotring and so on and so forth. And then this pen, the Trimax, was made by Flair Writing, which is like, my understanding is it's a larger pen manufacturer in India, one of the largest, I think. Anyway, maybe interesting, maybe not. But let's get back to the pen now. This is an all plastic rollerball, capped. Obviously, the cap is really on there firmly. You got to apply a lot of pressure to pull it off. That's why it helps if you kind of use your thumb. Once it's the writing tip is exposed, we see it's a needle tip, and it has a clear grip area. Very common to see that. Like here is a Pilot High-Tech Point V5 or Pilot Precise P5, whatever, and fairly similar clear area over the feed. That sort of tree or whatever it is, that shape continues like here. Obviously, it's not holding ink the way it is here. This is similar. You see the two different needle points, more of a blunt tip in the Japanese style, and this one is slightly conical at the top, which is more typical of an Indian pen, just to make some broad generalizations. I wouldn't say it's like always true, but you definitely see this shape more often. And both of these are 0.5 millimeters. So you can see they're relatively similar in size. As far as the rest of the pen goes, you can see a plastic body over here and kind of like some triangle type shapes. I haven't seen any other designs. I think this is maybe the only design. And not too much else. There's a barcode and then some other, no real other details. It doesn't say 0.5 millimeter or any real indications there. Has a really firm cap, as I noted. The clip is also quite strong, so it really grabs on, and you have a big kind of bump here. So if you have a thicker article of clothing or a backpack or even a belt, it'll definitely stay on. See some workings up here just to give it kind of like a robot helmet type look. Doesn't really do anything, but it looks kind of cool. The pen is, as it notes on the materials, refillable. And what happens is you twist this off. This is just a really lightweight plastic shell. There's really nothing to it, but It and the cap are what the manufacturer would consider to be the pen. This part, even though it's kind of a pen unto itself, you could write and even hold this. This is what Reynolds calls the refill. It even says Reynolds Trimax refill. And you could see that this is the piece that you would replace if you were to refill the pen. You don't actually put ink in this. So as far as refills goes, it feels a little bit wasteful for me. But this is, again, a style that happens in a lot of different pens, and Uniball Vision and a few other ones are similar in shape, and like the Uniball Elite. I forget which one exactly it is, but it's very similar. Technically, you could separate out this piece and this piece. If you could grab this top without breaking it and pull it out, you can refill this. And I know some people have done videos about it. Maybe not with this specific pen, but I have seen it with the Uniball Vision, where you could separate out the two. And I've definitely done it myself with the Pilot Varsity fountain pen, where you could pull this, separate this piece out, fill it, and then put it back. It's a high risk maneuver, and it definitely requires some practice, but it is possible. It's easier with a fountain pen, which it's easier to get fountain pen ink. Putting in a rollerball ink that works perfectly is a little bit tougher, but it can be done. So anyway, that is the refill. So you can consider this pen to be refillable or not. You're not saving a ton of plastic, obviously. If you go with a high tech point from Pilot, you'll see this pen actually is a rollerball that uses a cartridge. So you could refill this cartridge, or you could just throw it out and buy a new one. And the amount of plastic in here is much less. The trade-off by using a cartridge-based system is it holds a much less ink than this right here. This is quite a lot of ink, again, which is why they're calling it, I'm sure, that max write length. I'm sure part of that has to do with it being 0.5 millimeter too, where it would put out less ink. The pen does post, so you can go ahead and post it there. It's actually pretty well balanced posted, but it's quite long. As far as the writing goes, the Trimax is pretty solid. I would say it is unexceptional as a rollerball, but it's reliable and it does its job without any complaints, but it's just not really my favorite. Relative to the Pilot V5, you see the two are quite similar. I would almost say the Trimax was kind of inspired by the V5, but it's really hard to tell, how these pens come about and how they're made, that sort of thing. But they're very similar. Pilot uses a little bit more of a bluer blue. The Trimax is a little bit greener, but the writing is similar in result. The Pilot is a smoother pen, but Trimax does, render a line that's relatively similar. The Trimax, again, no problems writing with it. Not quite as smooth as a Pilot or a typical V5 or, typical 0.5 millimeter rollerball, and has no problems keeping up with you, and it lasts. It doesn't have any skipping issues. The blue, it's a little bit dull, and it's not super fun to write with, but again, it is a competent 0.5 millimeter rollerball and a competent rollerball overall. It's a really kind of a packed marketplace. These are, I would say, older style pens, and there's a lot of them out there. So it would take a lot for one of these pens to distinguish itself. The Trimax really is notable for its price and the fact that it's not typically a pen you would see in the US, but it's not too different than the other rollerballs you might have used in the past couple of years. And again, if you're using a Pilot Precise or Uniball Vision Elite or one of those pens and you are buying it in that 0.5 millimeter size, then you kind of know what to expect. Some of them will be smoother, like the Pilots will be smoother, but if you want a little bit more toothiness or whatever, or to save some money, then you could track down some of these Reynolds. I haven't used it in the larger sizes, so I don't really know what to expect. For instance, like here is a Uniball I, which is, again, basically a Vision Elite, and this is in a broad, which is a 1.0 millimeter. See a lot thicker of a line, but also you see a different color here. This is more of a navy than the Trimax, more of a pure blue that I actually find to be a lot more interesting than the Trimax. So you could actually, spend your money on the color as well. So ultimately, I would say the Trimax is a competent but not particularly interesting rollerball. I wouldn't recommend tracking these down. I did it because I was curious about Indian rollerballs and I was curious about Reynolds as a brand, and I've been enjoying using it, but again, it doesn't really distinguish itself from the larger pen market so much, so it's really not worth tracking these down. So yeah, pretty much covers it. Thanks for watching.